Brilliant. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for your time. I'm Mike from Xref, and we've got about 10 to 12 minutes to run you through exactly how this works. So I thought it's probably best if I just tell you a bit of a story. So Xref is a story of a bit of a bromance between two guys. The first guy is our CEO, Lee Martin Seymour. And Lee has a background in recruitment. He worked for a large agency for about 16 years. And essentially he had an incident in his team where one of his consultants placed a candidate in a role with a client, which was Westpac at the time. 3 weeks later, that candidate got fired. And Westpac went back to the agency, spoke to Lee and said, "We'd like to find out what's gone on here with the placement." The candidate interviewed really well, the references were glowing. Can you please go internal and do your due diligence and find out what's gone on here? So Lee walked into a filing cabinet, pulled open the drawer, pulled out some references that were covered in coffee stains, had a read through them and thought, you know what, whoever's written these isn't exactly a wordsmith. He walked over to the consultant who had made the placement and put them on his desk and said, "Look, walk me through this." And the guy just looked at him with a bit of a smirk on his face and said, "Well, you know how it is, mate. It was the last day of the month. I needed to put 20K on the board. Candidate wanted the job. The hiring manager wanted the candidate. I couldn't get hold of the referees, so I just made it all up." Scary stuff. Brilliant. So for that guy, it was a pretty bad day, and I think the smirk went off his face because he was exited from the business that day. And it was the light bulb moment, I guess, that went in Lee's head, and he thought, why are we still doing manual phone-based references? It's a broken process. It's very heavily manual. There's an awful lot of phone tag and voicemails and emails that goes into getting hold of somebody. More often than not, the person that we're speaking to, we're dialing a mobile phone number and we don't really know who we're talking to. We're kind of just ticking a box in the process, and it's obviously not secure. So Lee's meeting that morning was with a guy called Tim Griffiths, and in Sydney, if anybody needed an IT manager, Lee would say, "No, you don't, you just need Tim. He's going to come into your boardroom, wave his arms around, do some whiteboarding, and he'll actually hire your IT team for you." So Tim's from a very deep technical background, been a software CTO and run his own businesses in the UK. And over coffee, Tim just looked at Lee and just said, "I don't really understand what your problem is, mate. Why don't you just automate it?" And I think that coffee turned into about 3 bottles of red wine. And on the back of an envelope, they came up with Xref, and this was about 7 years ago. Where I fit into this picture, 2 years ago I joined Xref when we were a startup of 3 people. Since then we've been on a bit of a journey. I'm from a recruitment background myself. When I started we had about 10 customers, and the first one was Westpac, so we had a nice starting point. And then the last 2 years we've been on a really nice journey, so we've grown to about 50 people in Sydney. We've set up an office in the UK and in Toronto, and we've listed on the ASX. And it's because we've got a platform that really works, and it's really nice to come and tell you the story. So, problem with the traditional offline process of reference checking is exactly what I've said. You don't really know who you're talking to. Often discriminatory questions might be being asked, and it's all just a little bit cumbersome. With Xref, we've put the candidate in the driving seat. So everything is automated, it's online. As an employer, you put the candidate in the driving seat so that they have responsibility to drive the process, and it's a really nice way to see if people are actually engaged in your recruitment process and if they're looking to get a job. We've put everything on mobile, and in aged care, it's amazing the amount of people that will say to me, people just don't have email addresses or mobile devices, and it's absolute nonsense. From experience, we see about 97% of Xref requests being completed within about 30 hours of the request, And 60% of referees will actually complete the process in the evening or on the weekend on a mobile device. Because if you think about it practically, if you're a referee, you're quite busy in the middle of the day. People are trying to get hold of you when you're sat in here or you're sat in a meeting. Whereas doing it this way, you can sit down in the evening, put the kids to bed, you're on your iPad, and you can actually have a think about relevant examples of how that candidate actually did perform in that role, and add a bit more context. So that's what we've done. We've put it online, and it's designed to free up time and cost for an agency or for an aged care provider. Often hiring managers are driving this process. Massive inconsistencies, they've never really been trained. Everybody sort of gets a template. Are they reading it? Are they asking permission to take a reference? Are they speaking to referees and saying, you know, I'm going to read you the Privacy Act and the disclaimers, and then I'm definitely not going to ask you if you're going to have a baby in the next 6 months. You know, how are we policing that and how's that being governed? So, just to give you an example of who's using this platform, it's a little bit of everybody and anybody. Get my head out of the way. And where I've fallen into this is with Anglican retirement villages, who were the first aged care provider to come onto the platform. So prior to Xref, they had a team of 10 internal recruiters that were spending days, if not weeks, trying to get hold of referees. More often than not, when they dialed a mobile number, it was somebody's next door neighbour or a family friend or Joe that works in the corner shop down the road. It wasn't the candidate's manager or their previous manager. So if you spent days, if not weeks, going through that process, it's a complete waste of time. So since Anglican retirement villages, we've seen a real big spike within aged care and disability services and core not-for-profits. And I think the real big thing in this sector is adding some rigour to the process, making sure that you're compliant, making sure that you've got governance and that you're protecting the organisation against risk. The time and the cost savings are obvious. It's automation, it takes seconds, it's really easy to use, it's intuitive. But it's about having an audit trail and putting that trail online and doing it that way. So I had a couple of short video case studies. I'm not sure if they're going to work or if we've got time, Michael. What do you think? Should we try this one? We've got one from Scalabrini Village, who are an aged care provider. Let's smell that sound. Okay, maybe we can send it afterwards. That's fine. Sorry, cause chaos. But Scalabrini are a nice example because they have 7 facilities in New South Wales. Prior to Xref, it was facility managers that were doing references, and I'm sure that they could be doing much more important things with their time. If they didn't have time to do it, it was passed to an administrator who's so far removed from the process, they don't know the candidate, they don't really know what they're looking for from the reference, so there wasn't really too much point in running through it. So I can send that to you afterwards. It might be useful to have a look at. A few stats. So in the last couple of years, we've seen an awful lot of references going through the platform. It's quick and it's really easy to use. There's a level of employment verification that's built into this. So more often than not, we'll see a candidate will say that they're a manager and that they worked together with this referee for 5 years. Well, as part of the Xref process, the referee can actually say, no, you weren't a manager, you were a coordinator, and we didn't work together for 5 years, it was for 6 months. And it's really useful to get data-driven insights and have a look at how that's working, rather than picking up the phone and making a bit of a gut feel. I just have some slides here to show how it's mobile. And I guess that's a big thing about the recruitment industry at the moment. It's an art. Recruitment is an art. We've all worked in recruitment, but we've got to add some science to it. And I think in the modern day, there's so much technology that's available to help us recruit and do it more effectively and more efficiently and more safely. So we ran an independent study of 2,000 candidates who had applied for roles in the past 2 years. And we asked them some questions. And there's some Xref recruitment risk reports on the front desk there, which you can take away with you. The stats aren't that surprising, but it just re-emphasises, I think, what's going on in the real world. And what the study found was that 70% of candidates are willing to lie or deceive in order to get a job. Nearly 30% of those candidates were also happy to tell their referees to tell a lie on their behalf so that they could get a job. So I wonder, how many of us have been a candidate in the last couple of years? How many have been referees? And I think the big thing is, who would admit to having ever made a bad hire? And then what have you then done about it? And there's so much available at the moment that can help you make much more informed decisions in a cost-effective way. So hopefully that helps. That's an overview of Xref, and yeah, please ask me any questions.
Mike, I had 2 questions that I have been asked for it.
Okay.
When we do a reference check over the phone, we have the ability to probe referees depending on some of their responses. How do you do that when you do it automatically through Xref?
Yeah, great question. So obviously we understand that there is a bit of a human touch point, and it's a sensitive process, taking a reference. Because referees can do it when it suits them, we're picking up 60% more content. So we measure the word count to make sure that you're not getting 1 or 2 word answers, you're getting plenty of data back. But also, at the end of every reference template, we'd actually encourage the employer to ask, if we want to follow up and probe, when can we actually do that? And the referee could say, Friday, 4 p.m, give me a call. And at least it's a quick connected call, and you can actually speak to them, because we're back to the art piece. But you don't have to go through the whole manual part of chasing and conducting a reference. And with our fraud algorithm, if we're able to potentially detect fraudulent candidates through that process, then it works seamlessly.
Okay. I know in many industries, especially in aged care, personnel data is sacrosanct. So where does the data flow? How do you maintain privacy for these records? Do they belong to these people, or how does it go, please?
Good question again. So as we've grown, we've understood that it is vitally important that data and privacy are covered. So we actually have a compliance officer that now works for Xref. Despite my accent, we are a Sydney, Australian-based business, and all the data is hosted locally in Australia. It's on a .com.au, and we have a fantastic support team that are there to help people out if need be.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions in the room? Excuse me.
Yep.
Thanks, Brett. My name's Tiffany.
Hey.
Thank you. My question is about, particularly in aged care, the workforce is fairly untrained. A lot of people, at least in my experience, you would not employ again. Do you have a feedback system within Xref that looks at the opportunity for putting that sort of information in? So, if you've you've employed somebody and they might have been a fail for whatever reason, you wouldn't employ them again. I mean, obviously, the guy that burnt down the place in Sydney is never going to be employed again, except he's going to be in jail, but, Yeah. But if people had known about that circumstance, then he might not have been employed. So is there a feedback mechanism to say, I wouldn't employ this person again?
So there's, really, really good question. There's sort of 2-pronged attack with this, and it's around privacy and technology and the API piece. So as an employer, you own the data. So you couldn't share that data among other employers because that would be a breach of privacy. However, we have an algorithm that runs in our back-end platform which can actually red flag candidates that might try and fraud this process, or that employers will pull out as red herrings and say, do not let this person start in another role somewhere. So we have this, and it's matched on email addresses. So assuming the candidate would apply for the same role with the same email at another organisation, we could potentially red flag that to the other employer. I think probably the best solution for this is using technology to our advantage, and this is where Michael's platform comes in perfectly, especially looking at with the partnerships, because if we can then plug in and have a sort of one place, one size fits all database of all of these care workers that have been referenced, that have got their police checks, that have done the rest of it, that we'll be able to manage that much more effectively. So that's why this is such an important event this morning, to see who's doing exactly what and how we can manage it more effectively. So does that help? Yes.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, my name's Jim.
Jim.
You mentioned before about the word count that you get from referees.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming they actually type up a report. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm asking is because my experience is sometimes they're very hard to track down, and it can be difficult to actually get them for 15 minutes on the phone just to go through a series of questions.
Yeah.
So how do you get them to engage and actually, type up a report?
Yeah, good
So
question.
it's a silly question, but
no,
it's just...
It's not. They're all good questions. So we send automated reminder emails. Some people don't love that, but we've tried to bridge the gap between pestering people and just getting the references back. So 24, 36, 48 hours, reminders go to the candidate and to the referee. The surprising stat is that 97% of referees will actually complete the process in 30 hours. And I think that's down to the reminders that may get pushed out on 24 hours, but also the fact they can do it on a mobile device in their own time when it suits them. And it will all auto-save. So if you're on your iPad and you're on the bus on the way home from work, you go through a tunnel, you lose your internet, you're about to strangle the person in front of you. This way, when you click on the link in the email, all the content's there and it's saved. So it's a nice experience for referees.
And it sounds like it's also part of what we were talking about yesterday with one of the presenters was saying about you need it all to be mobile ready now. Same as doing mandatory training on your phone. It's got to be done. So it's on the train home, it's on the bus to work or going home. If you have to sit in front of a computer, it no longer computes these days.
Absolutely.
Any other questions for Mike?
Sorry, just one more.
Follow up.
Do you link, and I might have missed it, you might have mentioned it, but like APRA, do you, when you do a search of references and you do a matching of information, do you go to websites like that? I mean, I know that should be something the employer should do, but I've had experiences where people actually don't even think about checking on that for allied health professionals, which is an obvious one to do, but people do miss it. So that point you raised about if there's a condition placed on someone's registration. So do you do that as part of your reference checking as an add-on?
So about 18 months ago, we looked at building all of the other checks, and we got certified by CrimTrack to go and find you police checks and criminal record checks. But there's really good providers like CV Check who have got all of that covered. So we've just stuck to what we do really well, which is automate this pre-employment reference piece and deliver quick data-driven insights and let these guys focus on all the other probity checks.
A lot of what we find and what we recommend is people stick to their knitting. As Mike has just articulated, they have a great platform for when a candidate's put forward a couple of references for finding out there's much information from those references. Moving into an actual background check on education, employment, police check, ARPA registration, etc. It is another check, but it's a very different type of check. The technology involved in that is very bespoke. So that's why when I showed you the screen about the recruitment side, there are a number of different parts to it. They're all small providers, but they add up into a really succinct process for making sure that all the checks are done on a person. Anything else? Big voice.
Hi, I'm Sue. Just interested in the costing for use of your service.
Excellent question.
Glad someone
Yeah.
finally asked.
Good. It's 9:40. Happy to get into that. So it's really straightforward. Xref works on a credit basis. So one credit covers one candidate, and you can do as many references as you need for each candidate. If you bought one credit, we charge you $49.99 or $50. And the credits don't expire. So what people tend to do with a bit of volume is purchase a pack, draw down. If you don't use them, they roll over. If you use them up, you top up. And the way that we calculate the ROI, again, pretty straightforward. What are you paying your hiring managers or your HR team right now to go through this process? And we reckon it takes about an hour to get a reference done if you think of the chasing, getting it done, tidying it up, sending it across. So if you're doing 2 or 3 references for $50, then it writes itself.
I'd also like to add on top of the actual cost, literal cost in money sense of $49 versus the one of your employees doing it. The process is usually a lot better than what most people can do in-house. The average cost of recruiting a carer is $1,500 to $2,000. That's not including their initial training and budding period. That is just the hiring process. So if you make a mistake and you have to redo that process, so if you've got the information at the start that can say, yes, this is someone for us or no, someone for us, it lowers your risk. Lowers your risk of making a mistake.
Absolutely. And what's absolutely mad, and we see this happen every single day, is that candidates get red flagged for essentially making up fake email addresses and answering their own references. So because this is smart tech, we have an algorithm which can catch them out, because we can see timestamps, IP addresses, mobile devices, browsers that are being used. And we've had incidents with aged care employers where a candidate has sat in their bedroom and made up a fake Gmail in Yahoo and just written his own reference. We've had an aged care recruitment agency whose candidate said his referees were overseas in India, and all of a sudden he's red flagged, everybody's in Sydney. So if we can stop you just hiring one bad candidate, then we'd like to think that's an additional value add there.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Cheers.